we're now looking at a world where 70% plus of revenues in the space sector are being generated commercially. Within 2 to 3 years, you could actually have a physical device in orbit. It's not a future thing, it's happening today. And so it's important to pay attention to it.
Welcome to The Insight in 15, the new podcast from KPMG that takes a practical look at the big issues facing business leaders today. I'm Stuart Burt, and today's episode is going to be out of this world. Why? Because we're talking space technology. And I'm delighted to be joined by Neil Rae, Head of Space for KPMG. Welcome, Neil, to the podcast.
Hello, and thank you. Thanks very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Neil, I'm going to start first with going back to the basics, because in some ways space is a bit an off-the-wall topic for business. What do we actually mean by space? Is this astronauts and space rockets, all the sorts of things that we see in the movies?
Yes, in the sense that we began having people go into space, and man reaching the moon and so on in the 1960s. So that's what tends to focus people's minds. That's how people tend to think about space. But today, what we're really seeing is we're seeing a huge innovation in digital infrastructure, the ability to communicate, in observation data about the planet's surface that we've just never had before.
And if I'm a business leader, why should that matter to me, especially if I'm in a sector that doesn't necessarily feel that it's close to the space industry as a whole?
And so generally when I talk to people about space, I don't begin with space as a subject. It's easier to begin by exploring problems that they have, and then exploring how might those problems be solved by methods that are affordable and accessible. And then, if I happen to mention, by the way, this is coming from space, suddenly it's cool and it's useful, and that adds to the story. But if you begin that journey by saying to people, hey, I'm going to talk to you about space, almost immediately you see people start to cancel out. They sort of go, that sounds literally like astronauts. It sounds literally like rocket science, and it sounds very expensive. That doesn't fit into my worldview. Therefore, it's nothing to do with me.
So you've got to go pretty quickly from, I guess, what's happening in the sector in terms of innovations, but then bring it to the sort of downstream use cases.
To understand those use cases, exactly.
And what are those use cases? I mean, what's the most interesting ones that you're seeing out there that business should be interested in?
So by way of example, when you look at Earth observation data, the way in which that has changed with commercial capabilities is really quite significant. There are companies, for example, with 20 centimeter resolution radar of the planet's surface, which lets you see through cloud and see, daily what is going on across the whole of the surface of the Earth. There are companies which have hyperspectral chromatography that lets you, for example, see what state crops are when they're growing, and where are they in their growing cycle compared to where you'd expect them to be. So if you're in the game of crop futures and that kind of thing, and then that actually is a significant shift in information that you've never had before. And rather than send somebody to go and investigate, to go and look, actually you can get that data immediately to hand. And so quite quickly people can come to a much clearer conclusion based on data, instead of what historically would have been a human judgment based on the cost of sending somebody to go and visit that particular location. So those kind of, the ability to use Earth observation data to gain insight that we haven't had before is significant. But you then have methods of communication, so the ability to connect differently to satellites. There are a number of companies, for example, doing 5G from satellite, which means your ordinary 5G phone can potentially now connect to satellites and use satellite telephony rather than just terrestrial telephony. And if you imagine being in a remote location, or somewhere where there isn't a great deal of mobile phone infrastructure, then that's actually quite impactful. There's another company, for example, who are doing Bluetooth from satellites. So they've been able to get a satellite to connect by Bluetooth to a Bluetooth device on the planet's surface. And that again is a changing context that we've just not had before. Bluetooth is everywhere. you might find, for example, your washing machine's got it in, but now there's this potential of what's a low cost technology to connect and send data to satellites, which allows people without lots of infrastructure to be able to connect together assets and manage those all across the surface of the Earth. So these are significant shifts that just haven't existed in the past.
And what's striking there is, you mentioned a couple of sectors: insurance, telecoms, retail, and consumer goods. That is across sectors that this is happening.
Yes.
Are there areas that are further ahead or further behind, more traditional industry, manufacturing? Where are they on this sort of development?
So I would say this is all happening very rapidly. We are going through a shift that is therefore not yet fully adopted by many sectors. There are certainly sectors like telecommunications that have been using satellites for a very long time, and therefore, this is just the next generation of that thinking, and so it's probably quicker to pick it up and apply it. But it's probably true to say that across most sectors, we're at the cusp of adoption. We're just as people are starting to adopt and starting to invest significantly. An example would be life sciences. So life sciences have been looking at the application of experimentation in orbit and doing trials in orbit. So there's some real potential there around what's that going to mean over the next 12 to 18 months. And it's that sort of time horizon, not, over the next decade.
Yeah.
So a much quicker time horizon around innovation, and a number of sectors that are actively exploring this at this point in time.
And do you see a role for investor education in, I guess, busting some of the myths that might be out there that this is just something for another company, another industry?
Yeah, no, I would definitely say so. I would say the historically, space has been regarded as a high-risk environment to get involved in. And it's certainly not the case that it's completely low risk, that there's absolutely no chance of anything going wrong, because, of course, there remain risks attached to this. But there's an increasing reliability of launch capability, an increasing reliability of satellite services. And the consequence of that is that the risk of it has reduced significantly, as has the capital that you have to put up to be able to put something up to launch. So this reducing cost of launch means that that risk investment and reward trade-off has shifted, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the investor communities have fully caught up with that. And certainly from a UK point of view, I think there's a lot we could be doing more to help investors think that through and understand that. So that the financial markets here in the UK play a greater role for investment in space, compared to, for example, the US financial markets who are actively pursuing this. We're now looking at a world where 70% plus of revenues in the space sector are being generated commercially, and therefore we're seeing very important investment taking place from a commercial funding sources perspective. That's what's really driving the growth.
This, to me, feels like it's a ripe area for startup investment and almost creating those unicorns. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, no, I would certainly say that a lot of the innovation that we're seeing is really coming from a startup ecosystem. And that's a genuinely global ecosystem where firms are very rapidly going from a good idea, a good sort of engineering piece of insight, or a kind of like a concept that they want to go and test, and then taking that and physically testing it, because within 2 to 3 years you could actually have a physical device in orbit, and then seeing what that can do. And the cost of doing that has reduced to the low millions. The consequence of that is that people are really innovating, and that's coming often from startups, because they're bringing that kind of new, fresh thinking into an environment that has traditionally been very long-term, very long decision-making, it's accelerated everything.
We've just had the modern industrial strategy that had space as one of the frontier industries.
Yeah.
Does that give you a sense of optimism?
Most definitely. I think there's a real opportunity here for the UK. The rate of growth in the sector as a whole globally is really significant. And so the opportunity for the UK to participate in that and actually take a leading role, both from a financial services point of view, but also in terms of the innovative knowledge base that we have, the enthusiasm for startups. There's a whole range of areas in which the UK could absolutely take a leading role. I think one of the things that we need to do is be encouraging people in marketing, people in law, people in accountancy, people in a whole range of skills and areas of knowledge to even consider working in the space sector as it grows, because all of those different disciplines have a part to play in the growth of space from a UK point of view.
I want to just turn attention back to the practical side of things. And despite everything that we've said, there might still be some businesses that think this is all really interesting, but it is just not for me. I don't understand how it can apply to my business. What would your message be to them about the benefits of space in, say, 1 year and maybe 5 years' time?
So I think the first thing to consider is there's almost an inevitability that some aspect of space is either already touching or is about to touch the sector that you're working in. And that's going to apply to your competitors and to yourself and to new market entrants potentially who might make use of these capabilities. So really, therefore, step one is understand what are the new capabilities coming out, whether that's Earth observation, whether it's communications and connectivity, or whether it's, for example, processing, so edge computing in orbit, where rather than have to process lots of data on the planet's surface, you'll get insight straight to you. So for me, understanding what's happening and what's about to happen is really important. And then considering, okay, and what are those use cases for us as an organization? What are we going to do about it? And to your point, how do we position ourselves so that once this is mature, and that's mature in the next year or two, not mature in the next decade, what will we then do to position ourselves in the market so that we have a competitive advantage? So it's thinking through those three steps, really. What's coming and what's available now? What does that mean to us in terms of the use cases? And then how are we going to position ourselves for a competitive advantage relative to our competitors?
And who drives that ambition within an organization? Because I think you're probably the first head of space that I've ever met. Not all organizations are going to have a head of space. Where does that innovation and taking the ambition of what's happening in space and applying it to your own business, where should that responsibility typically lie?
So for me, this is a new technology or a new set of technologies, but in many cases, they're digital technologies. They're digital and data-driven technologies that really, therefore, would typically come under the purview of a chief information officer or a chief technology officer. It's just a new set of technologies that are arriving in the enterprise. So for me, the people who are probably best placed within the org structure to think about this would sit in that kind of area, so a CIO, possibly there's already an innovation group within the organization that are considering digital transformation in some form.
Bro, thank you. So we're almost out of time. We promised that this would be just 15 minutes. So I'll leave you with the final question that we're asking everyone on this podcast, which is that if you had one message to people listening today from business about adapting to space technology, what would it be?
So for me, we're in a world now of science fact, not science fiction, and it's really how do we keep up with that rate of change that's going to happen. It's not a future thing; it's happening today, and so it's important to pay attention to it.
Great, thank you very much. Space is timeless, but we are not, so we will leave it there. Thank you very much, Neil, for joining the podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do like and subscribe on Spotify, on YouTube, and on Apple Podcasts as well. And we'll see you again for the Insight 15.